Imagine looking into a mirror right now.
Okay.
But instead of, your own reflection staring back at you, you see a highly curated, digitally altered, like perfectly smooth version of yourself.
The Instagram face.
Exactly. And then slowly, that perfect digital mask just starts to peel off your skull, taking the actual flesh with it.
Oh, gross. Yeah.
Right. It's horrifying because in the cinematic landscape of spring 2026, the monsters aren't just hiding out in the woods anymore.
No, they're not waiting for teenagers to take a wrong turn.
Exactly. They're hiding inside our filters. They're lurking in our podcast apps. I mean, they are waiting for us in the break rooms of our mall jobs.
Which is such a wild shift.
It is. So today, we're looking at a whole slate of horror and thriller films that are pointing the camera directly at the things that you and I do every single day.
And it is a massive pivot from the escapism we usually associate with, going to the multiplex.
Yeah.
We're seeing this distinct polarization right now. On one side of the industry, you have filmmakers who are just desperately clinging to the past.
Like really clinging to it.
Try to bludgeon the audience with 1970s nostalgia. And then on the other side, you have creators who recognize that the modern audience is already terrified of their own daily routines.
Right, their own technology.
Exactly, and their own curated identities.
Which is exactly what we're going to tear apart today in this deep dive. I have a massive stack of sources sitting in front of me.
It's a lot to get through.
It is. We've pulled advanced movie reviews, deep dive Wikipedia production histories, official trailers, some pretty scathing box office reports, and critical essays covering the early 2026 horror slate.
Right.
And our mission today is to sift through all of this so you, listening right now, have a complete, well-informed roadmap of what is actually happening in the culture of fear.
You don't need to spend 40 hours reading deep dive Reddit threads.
No, please don't. Or sitting through terrible test screenings. We are going to extract the mechanisms of what actually scares us today.
From the catastrophic $85 million studio failures down to the micro-budget indie films shot in someone's living room.
Right, because analyzing what fails to scare an audience right now is honestly just as eliminating as analyzing what succeeds.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I want to start with the failures. Specifically, the trap of the nostalgia camp.
Yes, the blunt force approach.
Yeah. There is a film hitting Shudder on March 6th called Dolly. It's an 82-minute indie directed by Rod Blackhurst.
Yep.
And I was reading a frankly brutal review by Brian Eggert over at Deep Focus Review. He gave it a dismal 1.5 out of 4 stars.
Ouch.
Yeah, Eggert's opening thesis is that the filmmakers should have just called the movie the Tennessee Dollface Massacre because of how shamelessly it rips off its influences.
Well, the overarching reliance on blunt force trauma is a fascinating crutch. Let's look at the actual text of Dolly.
Let's do it.
The narrative follows a woman named Macy, played by Fabienne Therese, and her boyfriend Chase, played by Sean William Scott.
Stifler in a horror movie.
Right, and they are hiking in the Tennessee woodlands. Chase is a single father. He's carrying a ring. He's, planning to propose.
Setting up the stakes.
Exactly. They stumble across this dilapidated, rusted-out house in the woods, and out comes the antagonist, Dolly.
And I need to describe Dolly because the visual is wild. Dolly is played by the professional wrestling champion Max the Impaler.
Which is a brilliant physical casting choice.
Oh, completely. You immediately have this towering, heavily muscled, just incredibly imposing physical presence.
Right.
And Dolly wears this cracked porcelain doll mask with one eye missing. And when Macy and Chase first see her, she's casually cradling a headless corpse surrounded by a cloud of flies.
It sets the tone immediately.
And she immediately dispatches Chase. Like it's not a drawn-out suspense sequence. She literally splits his face open with a shovel.
Which establishes the physical threat right then and there. But the film attempts to layer psychological horror over the standard slasher framework.
Right, it gets weird.
Instead of simply killing Macy, Dolly kidnaps her and subjects her to a highly specific form of domestic torture. She treats this adult woman like a literal infant.
The details in Eggert's review made my skin crawl, but not in a good way. Like, Macy wakes up trapped in a giant crib.
Yeah.
Dolly forces her to sit in a high chair, physically shoves a pacifier into her mouth, and uses a wooden paddle to spank her when she cries or misbehaves.
It's just so unsettling.
And then we get the feeding scenes. Dolly forces Macy to eat this gelatinous, disgusting-looking stew, followed by a baby bottle filled with spoiled, curdled milk. And when Macy inevitably gags and refuses it, Dolly actually attempts to breastfeed her.
Right. It is a grotesque perversion of the maternal instinct.
Yeah.
You have this hulking, brutal figure attempting to force a domestic, nurturing dynamic onto a captive.
It's a lot.
And to compound the backwoods trope, when Macy finally makes a break for it, she runs straight into Dolly's deranged father.
Played by Ethan Suplee, right?
Yes. And he calls this hulking killer baby girl, which, for context, is a direct callback to Blackhurst's own 2022 proof-of-concept short film.
But according to the critical consensus, all of this forced psychological weirdness totally falls flat because the movie is just an empty vessel for 1974 aesthetics.
The aesthetic crutch, yeah.
The cinematographer, Justin Derry, shot the whole thing on 16mm film to get that gritty, chaotic, documentary-style grain.
The grain that Tobe Hooper made famous in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly. They even have the hikers walk past a literal wooden sign that reads Hooper Mine.
Bit on the nose.
Just a bit.
Well,
And they end the film with Macy screaming unhinged in the back of a fleeing vehicle, which is basically a shot-for-shot lift of Marilyn Burns surviving Leatherface.
right.
Add to that, we also have a trailer for another movie called The Hermit,
Oh, right.
starring Lou Ferrigno, which is about a cannibal on a pig farm in upstate New York where a, quote, country bumpkin at a gas station, end quote, gives a group of kids bad directions.
Classic setup.
The tagline is literally, "We never waste the meat."
Well, these filmmakers are operating under the assumption that the aesthetic of grit is a substitute for the architecture of dread. When Tobe Hooper shot the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on 16mm film in the sweltering Texas heat, the grime wasn't an Instagram filter.
Right, it was real.
It was an economic reality of independent filmmaking in the 1970s that happened to perfectly mirror the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate cynicism of the era.
Yeah, the audience felt like they were watching a snuff film because the medium matched the cultural mood.
Exactly.
Let me push back on this idea that homage is inherently bad, though.
Okay.
Quentin Tarantino built an entire career on synthesizing 1970s grindhouse aesthetics. Why is it a crutch when Rod Blackhurst does it in Dolly, but it's genius when someone else does it?
That's a fair question.
Isn't there an argument that 16mm grain and practical gore are just the universally accepted visual language of horror?
It becomes a crutch when the visual language is deployed to mask an empty narrative foundation.
Ah, I see.
Tarantino uses vintage aesthetics, but he anchors them to incredibly dense, character-driven dialogue and subverted expectations. What Eggert points out in his review of Dolly is the structural failing. The film is only 82 minutes long, yet Blackhurst chops it up into a half-dozen convoluted chapters with title cards.
Which is so distracting.
Eggert brutally compares it to something you would watch on Quibi.
Ouch. That is a devastating comparison.
It really is, because it highlights the attention deficit nature of this script.
Yeah.
If you break an 80-minute movie into tiny, digestible chapters, you're destroying any sustained tension.
Yeah, you can't build a suffocating atmosphere if you are constantly resetting the clock with a title card.
Tobe Hooper didn't use title cards. He locked you in a room with a maniac and threw away the key.
Dolly just points at a poster of a maniac and expects you to do the heavy lifting.
Exactly.
It's like putting a vintage Instagram filter on a poorly composed photo and hoping people think it's art.
That is the perfect analogy.
So if relying on the blunt force trauma of a shovel to the face and a vintage filter fails to actually scare a modern audience, what replaces it?
That's the big question.
Because if I look at the indie films that are actually generating buzz this spring, they are abandoning the woods entirely.
Right.
They are moving into environments that we associate with extreme safety and curation. Which brings us to a film called Forbidden Fruits.
This is a fascinating pivot towards sociological horror.
Forbidden Fruits is a comedy horror premiering at SXSW in mid-March, and it drops on Shudder and IFC on March 27th.
Okay.
It's directed by Meredith Alloway, her feature debut, and it's adapted from a stage play by Lily Houghton. The play's original title was Of the Woman Came the Beginning of Sin, and Through Her We All Die.
Wow.
Right. The script was actually on the 2023 Blacklist, which tracks the best unproduced screenplays in Hollywood.
So the writing pedigree is strong.
Very. And they managed to pull together a massive cast of Gen Z and millennial stars. Lily Reinhart, Lola Tung, Victoria Pedretti, Alexandra Shipp, Gabrielle Union, and Emma Chamberlain in her acting debut.
The casting alone tells you exactly who this film is targeting and what specific cultural anxieties it wants to exploit.
And the setting is brilliant. The story takes place entirely within a mall store called Free Eden.
Right. An obvious stand-in for those hyper-curated, faux-bohemian corporate wellness brands.
Exactly. And after hours, the employees, who all have names like Apple, Cherry, and Fig, run a literal witchy femme cult in the basement of the store.
Of course they do.
The inciting incident happens when a new hire, a girl named Pumpkin, played by Lola Tongue, arrives and challenges their dynamic.
Okay.
The synopsis explicitly states that Pumpkin challenges their performative sisterhood, forcing the women to either fake their own poisons or succumb to a bloody fate.
Performative sisterhood is the operational mechanism of this entire film. We are looking at the weaponization of corporate feminism.
Walk me through how that functions as horror, though. Because on the surface, a bunch of retail workers doing witchcraft in a mall basement sounds more like a teen CW drama than a genuine horror film.
To understand the horror, you have to look at the sociological reality of the spaces it critiques.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Free Eden represents an environment that demands absolute, unyielding emotional labor and toxic positivity. The employees aren't just selling clothes or crystals.
Right.
They are selling a curated lifestyle of empowerment and sisterhood. But anyone who has existed in those hyper-competitive, aesthetically driven spaces knows that the sisterhood is often a mask for intense relational aggression.
Oh, absolutely.
If you step out of line, if you fail to maintain the vibe, the group turns on you with a viciousness that is terrifying, precisely because it is wrapped in the language of wellness and therapy.
So the cult in the basement isn't a supernatural deviation from their day jobs.
No, not at all.
It's just the logical, bloody extension of their corporate mandate.
Exactly. The film literalizes the metaphor. The poisons the new hire forces them to face are the toxic resentments, the backstabbing, and the artificiality required to maintain the brand.
Wow.
It is terrifying because it takes an environment the audience interacts with constantly, the mall, the wellness boutique, and exposes the psychological violence bubbling just underneath the sage-smudging surface.
That makes perfect sense. We're terrified of the artificiality of our social circle.
Yes.
And speaking of artificiality and curation, I want to pair Forbidden Fruits with the trailer for a supernatural horror film called Dark Distortion.
Okay, let's look at this one.
Because if Forbidden Fruits turns the retail space into a nightmare, Dark Distortion turns our own pockets into a nightmare.
The premise of this one really pushes the boundaries of the haunted object subgenre.
It's wild. The trailer sets up a grieving mother and her ex-husband, Jeremy. Jeremy has apparently fallen deep into black magic following the tragic death of their son, Sammy.
Right.
Through some kind of ritual, Jeremy manages to transfer Sammy's spirit into an inanimate object to keep him around. But he doesn't use a doll. He doesn't use a creepy antique music box.
No.
He transfers the ghost of his son into a digital camera.
Which fundamentally changes the dynamic of the haunting.
In the trailer, the mother is screaming, "The camera is alive!" That thing turned on by itself, and then a second later, she was shoved across the room.
The camera is physically weaponized.
Yeah. Yes. And the trailer ends with this chilling, highly modern line delivered in a voiceover. The line is, "I want to die on camera."
What's fascinating here is the evolution of the haunted object.
Yeah, how does that work?
Historically, horror relies on antiquities. An ancient Egyptian amulet, a cursed puzzle box from hell, a Victorian doll.
Things with history.
Exactly. These objects represent the past intruding on the present. They carry the weight of forgotten sins. But a digital camera has no history. It is an instrument of the immediate present.
Wait, let me stop you right there. I have to play devil's advocate.
Okay, go for it.
We've seen haunted technology before. We had haunted VHS tapes in The Ring. We had a haunted TV in Poltergeist. We had haunted computers in a dozen terrible late 90s movies.
True.
Isn't a haunted digital camera just the exact same 1980s trope, but the screenwriter updated it with Bluetooth? How is this actually reflecting modern guilt, rather than just being a lazy recycling of The Ring?
It's a fair challenge. But the mechanism of interaction is completely different. The Ring and Poltergeist were about passive consumption. The horror came from what the technology was broadcasting to you.
Oh, interesting.
You sat on the couch, you watched the tape, and the monster came out of the screen. You were the victim of a broadcast.
Right.
A digital camera, however, is a tool of active creation. We use cameras to curate our own identities.
Yeah.
If you don't document an event, if you don't take a picture of your dinner or your vacation, modern social dynamics dictate that it essentially didn't happen.
We prove our own existence through the lens.
Precisely. We are obsessed with documentation. So when the camera itself becomes the monster, it is a manifestation of our fear that our obsession with curating our lives is actually destroying our ability to live them.
Wow.
The line, "I want to die on camera," isn't just a spooky threat. It is a searing indictment of a culture that values virality over survival. It literalizes the idea that the lens is consuming us.
Right, you aren't just passively watching a haunted tape.
Yeah.
The haunted object is the very thing you use to define your reality. That is incredibly bleak. I mean, think about the last time you curated a photo of yourself before posting it. You tweaked the lighting, you cropped out the messy background. You essentially created a tiny artificial reality.
Yeah.
Dark distortion is suggesting that those tiny artificial realities have teeth. It's like a literal deadly echo chamber.
It's the anxiety of the echo chamber made flesh.
So we have indie films finding incredible success by mining these highly specific, deeply intimate modern anxieties. They are working with relatively small budgets, which forces them to rely on concepts rather than spectacle.
Right. Constraints breed creativity.
But the major studios are operating on a completely different playbook in early 2026. They are trying to bludgeon the audience with sheer financial force and massive lore expansion.
Yes, the big swings.
Which begs the question, how does an $85 million budget impact a horror movie?
Historically, throwing massive amounts of money at the horror genre yields incredibly polarized results.
Yeah.
You either get a generation-defining blockbuster or you get a catastrophic, career-damaging failure.
Let's start with what seems to be a success, or at least a highly anticipated, logical use of studio resources. Ready or Not 2, here I come.
Ah, yes.
This is coming from Searchlight Pictures, directed by Radio Silence, the same directing team behind the 2019 original, as well as the recent Scream reboots and Abigail. It hits theaters on March 20th.
The first Ready or Not was a masterclass in contained, single-location tension.
Right. Samara Weaving played Grace, a young woman who married into the ultra-wealthy Ladomas family. On her wedding night, she discovers they have a tradition of playing a lethal game of hide-and-seek to honor a literal deal with the devil that built their board game empire.
It was essentially a vicious, bloody satire of old money and the impossible demands of marrying into the elite.
And Grace survived the night, and the entire family spontaneously combusted because they failed to kill her by dawn. It was a perfect, self-contained story.
Yeah.
So how do you logically escalate that?
Sequels to contain horror often fail because they just repeat the same scenario in a slightly different location. You see it constantly that survivors go to a hospital or a boat, and the exact same killer shows up.
But according to the production notes, Ready or Not 2 alters the fundamental scope of the threat. Grace's victory over the Ladomas family apparently triggered a massive ripple effect.
Okay.
Now, the wealthiest, most influential families across the entire globe, essentially the global elite, the Illuminati level of power, are forced to hunt Grace down.
Wow.
If they don't kill her, they lose their own fortunes and power. And to lure her out, they target her younger sister, Faith, played by Katherine Newton.
That is a structural triumph for a sequel,
Explain the mechanics of why that works so well.
because it expands the lore without abandoning the thematic core of the original film. The first movie asked, what would a family do to protect their wealth?
Right.
The sequel scales that up to ask, what would the entire global infrastructure of the ultra-rich do to protect their dominance?
That's a huge escalation. It is. It maintains the satirical bite, the idea that extreme wealth requires extreme blood sacrifice, but it justifies the larger studio budget by taking the hunt global.
Yeah.
And from a casting perspective, they've built an incredible ensemble to populate these elite families.
It's a stacked roster. They brought in Sarah Michelle Gellar, Elijah Wood, Sean Hattasey, and David Cronenberg, who is playing the patriarch of something called the Danforth family.
Having David Cronenberg, one of the legendary architects of body horror, stepping in as an antagonist in a mainstream horror comedy is a brilliant piece of metacasting.
Absolutely.
It signals to the audience that the filmmakers respect the genre's history.
It feels like a movie that knows exactly what it is and exactly who its audience is, which provides the most brutal, jarring contrast imaginable to our next film. I need to take a deep breath before we talk about The Bride.
Oh boy. This is the cautionary tale of the 2026 slate.
The Bride is a gothic romance reboot of James Whale's 1935 classic Bride of Frankenstein. It is written and directed by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Warner Bros. Gave her a budget of $85 million.
$85 million for a period piece gothic romance is an astronomical sum.
Let's just look at the raw pedigree of this production because it screams Oscar bait.
Okay.
Jessie Buckley stars as Ida, who becomes the bride.
Right.
She also inexplicably plays the ghost of Mary Shelley.
Wait, Duh.
Yeah. Christian Bale, known for his intense, immersive character work, is playing Frank, the monster. You have Peter Sarsgaard as a detective named Wiles. Annette Bening is Dr. Euphronius.
Wow.
Jake Gyllenhaal plays a Hollywood actor named Ronnie Reed. Penelope Cruz is in the mix. The cast is wall-to-wall prestige talent.
The problem with a cast like that and a budget like that is the economic reality of the film industry.
Yeah.
We use a term in the industry called four-quadrant.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot. Break down exactly what a four-quadrant movie entails and why it's a death sentence for a horror movie.
A four-quadrant film is a movie designed to appeal to all four major demographic quadrants: males under 25, males over 25, females under 25, and females over 25.
Okay.
When a studio spends $85 million on a production, plus another $40 to $50 million on global marketing, the movie must gross hundreds of millions of dollars just to break even.
Right.
To get those numbers, you cannot alienate anyone. You need families, you need teenagers, you need older adults, you need a four-quadrant hit.
But horror, by its very definition, is designed to alienate people. It's designed to make you uncomfortable, to push boundaries, to disturb you.
Exactly. This is the fundamental friction of big-budget horror. Throwing $85 million at a Frankenstein movie is like turning on the fluorescent overhead lights in a haunted house.
Ooh, I love that analogy.
Horror operates in the shadows. It operates in the negative space, and what the audience cannot clearly see. When you have a massive budget, studio executives demand that you put all that money on the screen.
Yeah, they want to see what they paid for.
They want sweeping, brightly lit vistas. They want CGI action sequences. They want the monster shown in Ultra HD 4K. And the moment you flood a horror concept with that much light and polish, you instantly kill the imagination. The tension evaporates.
That fluorescent light metaphor is perfect.
Yeah.
Because if you read the plot summary of The Bride, it sounds like they just kept throwing expensive concepts at the wall to see what would stick. It is completely unfocused.
It's the narrative flow.
The story is set in the 1930s across Chicago and New York. The ghost of Mary Shelley is possessing Ida, who is then murdered by henchmen working for a crime boss named Lupino.
Okay, that's already a lot.
Right. Meanwhile, Frank the monster seeks out Dr. Euphronius because he's lonely. They acquire Ida's corpse, revive her, but she wakes up with amnesia. Frank tricked her into thinking they are already married, and the film suddenly pivots into a Bonnie and Clyde-style cross-country crime spree.
Wait, what?
Yes. They are stowing away on trains, murdering civilians who harass them, causing a massive riot in a movie theater. They are being chased by the police and the mob.
The narrative sprawl is astonishing. It sounds less like a horror film and more like a chaotic action melodrama.
And it culminates in a drive-in theater where Frank is fatally shot in the head. The bride manages to escape with his massive corpse, drags him back to the laboratory, but then the mobster's henchman breaks in and shoots the bride dead as well.
Wow.
The movie ends with the doctor deciding to just revive them both all over again, and the final shot is their two reanimated corpses holding hands.
We have to look at the behind-the-scenes production history because it perfectly explains how this train derailed. This project didn't start at Warner Bros. It was originally set up at Netflix.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but Netflix, which is historically very generous with auteur directors, actually dropped the film during pre-production due to massive disputes over the budget and the shooting locations.
It's rare for Netflix to drop something like that.
Very rare. Gyllenhaal insisted on filming on location in New York, which is exorbitantly expensive. Netflix pushed for New Jersey to keep costs down. Gyllenhaal refused, they parted ways, and Warner Bros. Co-chairs Michael DeLuca and Pamela Abdy, who have a reputation in town for spending massive amounts of money to court prestige talent, stepped in to foot the $85 million bill.
And it resulted in a colossal, historic disaster. The film released in early March, and it absolutely cratered.
What were the numbers?
Box office analysts project it will lose upwards of $90 million for Warner Bros. It grossed a pathetic $14.7 million worldwide on its opening weekend.
The critical reception was equally devastating.
It was a bloodbath.
Yeah.
Stephanie Zacharek at Time magazine wrote that it was an, quote, intellectual joyride without the joy.
Ouch.
Donald Clark at the Irish Times said the movie exhibited a strain of clunkiness that would be more at home in an undergraduate review.
Brutal.
And there were multiple reports that the test screenings were so aggressively negative that Gyllenhaal was forced back into the editing room to cut out several bizarre, violent sequences just to make it palatable, including a scene where Christian Bale's Frankenstein licks black vomit off of Jessie Buckley's neck.
Which brings us back to the four-quadrant problem. A scene featuring a reanimated corpse licking black vomit off a neck is punk rock. It's weird. It's visceral. It's genuine horror.
Yeah.
But you cannot put that in an $85 million movie and expect general audiences to buy a ticket. By trying to force an inherently bizarre, niche, gothic horror concept into the mold of an expensive blockbuster, Gyllenhaal and Warner Bros. Achieved the worst possible outcome.
Right.
They alienated the hardcore horror fans who wanted the grit and the weirdness, and they alienated the general mainstream audience who found the whole thing too baffling and disjointed.
So what does this all mean? Does a massive budget actually hurt a horror movie by stripping away its grit? It's like building a luxury mansion on a swamp. It looks expensive, but the foundation is sinking.
That's exactly it.
An intellectual joyride without the joy. It really is the perfect summary. But this failure acts as an incredible pivot point for our understanding of what scares us today. Because if a sweeping, sprawling, immensely expensive movie about external monsters and crime bosses completely fails to resonate, it forces us to look inward.
Precisely.
If the fluorescent lights of studio filmmaking ruin the terror, filmmakers are realizing that they have to infect the one place those lights can't reach, our own bodies and our own identities.
This brings us to a subgenre that is experiencing a massive, profound renaissance in 2026. Body horror.
Yes.
But it's not the body horror of the 1980s. It's not The Fly or The Thing, where an external alien force mutates the flesh. It is body horror utilized as razor-sharp social satire.
I am so excited to talk about Slanted. This is an American body horror comedy directed and written by Amy Wang.
It's phenomenal.
It premiered at SXSW on March 8th, took home the Grand Jury Prize, and is hitting theaters via Bleecker Street and Fox. And the premise is one of the most provocative things I have ever read.
The conceptual brilliance of Slanted is how it grounds a terrifying sci-fi premise in the mundane, hyper-relatable anxiety of high school social dynamics.
Let's lay out the narrative framework. The film stars Shirley Chen as Joan Huang, a Chinese-American high school student. And Joan is in agony.
Right.
She is desperate to connect with her predominantly white peers. She wants to be prom queen, and she wants to be accepted by the apex predators of the school, a popular clique led by a girl named Olivia Hammond, played by Amelie Zilber.
The classic high school hierarchy.
Exactly. Joan is so desperate for their approval that she dyes her hair blonde, she buys Olivia expensive gifts, but she is continually mocked, ostracized, and made to feel entirely alien in her own skin.
It's the classic teen movie setup, but Wang uses it as a Trojan horse to introduce a profound commentary on assimilation.
And the horror element is introduced through social media. Joan discovers an algorithmically targeted ad for a clinic called Ethnos.
Okay.
The clinic is run by Dr. Willie Summer. And I want to pause here because Dr. Summer's backstory is the linchpin of the movie's thematic weight.
We have to be clear about how the movie frames this.
Right. And to be clear, we're just reporting on the narrative the film presents. Dr. Summer is an Indian-American physician who created a groundbreaking permanent ethnic modification surgery.
Wow.
He didn't create it to take over the world. The film explains that he created it because he was deeply frustrated with systemic racism, microaggressions, and constantly being passed over for professional opportunities despite his brilliance. So he created a surgery to turn people white, and he was patient zero.
He used it on himself.
He used it on himself, and he used it on his entire clinical staff.
It is the ultimate tragic capitulation to systemic bias. The concept of code switching is something sociologists discuss constantly.
Yeah.
It's the practice of altering your speech, your appearance, your behavior, and your cultural expression to conform to the dominant culture in order to survive or succeed.
Right.
What Amy Wang has done in Slanted is take the psychological toll of code switching and literalize it. She has turned the sociological pressure to assimilate into a physical, surgical intervention.
I mean, imagine the lengths you've gone to just to fit in at a new job or school. Think about altering your accent or hiding aspects of your background to appease a new friend group. We all perform to some degree.
We do.
What makes Slanted so deeply unsettling is that Joan chooses this confinement. She tricks her mother, who cannot read English, into signing the medical consent form, and she undergoes the ethnos surgery.
This is where it gets crazy.
When she emerges from the bandages, she is presenting as a white teenage girl. She takes on a new name, Jo Hunt, and is played by an entirely different actress, McKenna Grace.
The visual shock of swapping the lead actress mid-film forces the audience to confront the total erasure of Joan's identity.
And the most sickening part is that the surgery works. Society immediately rewards her.
Right.
Her teachers treat her better. She seamlessly integrates into Olivia's popular clique. She secures the endorsement for prom queen. But the cost is the total alienation of her past. She is pressured by Olivia to literally kick her former best friend, a South Asian girl named Brenda, out of a party.
Jo shatters her own history to maintain her new facade.
Yes.
But the rules of body horror dictate that the physical body must ultimately rebel against the artificial alteration. The facade cannot hold indefinitely.
And the physical toll is grotesque. As the prom approaches, Jo's new, surgically constructed white face begins to destabilize.
Oh no.
It literally begins to blister and peel off in sheets, revealing her original Asian skin tone underneath. The Ethnos clinic dismisses her panic, telling her to just use medical tape and rejuvenation cream to hold her face together.
That's horrifying.
It builds to this horrifying climax at the prom. Jo is on stage. She has just been crowned prom queen. She has achieved the ultimate symbol of American high school assimilation, and right as the crown is placed on her head, her face completely deteriorates and slews off in front of the entire student body,
Resulting in absolute disgust and terror from the crowd. It is a visceral, bloody metaphor for the unsustainability of forced assimilation.
But Amy Wang doesn't just stop at the physical horror. She delivers a narrative twist that completely recontextualizes the social hierarchy of the school.
What's the twist?
After Jo collapses on stage, she wakes up recovering in Olivia's bedroom. And while she's there, she discovers a devastating secret. Olivia and her wealthy father are actually Cuban-American.
Wait, really?
Yes, they are entirely estranged from Olivia's mother because the mother absolutely refused to undergo the ethnosurgery.
That twist is the thematic masterstroke of the film. It reveals that the exclusionary, dominant culture that Joan was so desperate to join isn't real.
Exactly.
The white popular girls are just as artificial, just as surgically altered, and just as deeply traumatized by the pressure to assimilate as Joan is. They are hiding their own heritage behind a literal mask of whiteness.
It breaks Joan. She finally realizes the magnitude of what she surrendered. She rushes back to the Ethnos clinic with her mother, begging Dr. Summer to reverse the procedure. But when she arrives, the waiting room is overflowing with people of color, all lining up, willing to pay any price to undergo the assimilation surgery.
Wow.
Dr. Summer coldly informs her that the modification is permanent. There is no going back. So Joan goes home, locks herself in her bathroom, and in one of the most violently cathartic scenes of the year, she uses her bare fingers to claw at the degrading surgical modifications.
That's intense.
She rips chunks of the white flesh off her face to expose her original Asian eyes underneath. And as she stares into the mirror, bloody and scarred, she tearfully appreciates her own eyes for the first time.
It is a devastating ending.
Yeah.
And I want to highlight your earlier point about Dr. Summer. He is one of the most complex antagonists in modern horror because his motivation is rooted in a twisted, pragmatic logic.
He is not a megalomaniac trying to rule the world. He is a man who looked at a deeply unequal society, realized he could not change the system, and instead invented a brutal, self-destructive tool to allow people to bypass the bias. He internalized the sickness of the society and monetized it. Which is why the horror of Slanted feels like it's only 5 minutes into our future. I compare the ethnosurgery to the ultimate permanent social media filter. Are we already pushing people toward these mental, if not physical, modifications?
We absolutely are.
We are already modifying ourselves to appease the algorithm. Slanted just adds a scalpel.
Slanted operates on the horror of a chosen confinement. Joan signs the consent form. But the final subgenre we need to examine today strips away that agency entirely.
Yes. This is the pivot from the macro-societal pressures of a high school to the micro-claustrophobia of a single room. We are seeing a massive surge in intimate, single-location psychological horror that achieves maximum tension with absolute minimal resources.
Which is incredibly hard to pull off.
And the most disturbing example of this is a film called The Good Boy. Or, for the American release, it's been retitled Heel. It premiered at the Glasgow Film Festival in early March, and it marks the English-language debut of Polish director Jan Komasa.
The premise of Heel immediately evokes the uncomfortable, boundary-pushing cinema of Yorgos Lanthimos' Think Dogtooth, or even Kevin Smith's bizarre body horror Tusk. It operates on the terror of forced domestication.
Let's lay out the scenario, because it is shocking. We follow a young, aggressive, heavily drug-addicted delinquent named Tommy, played by Anson Boone. Tommy is a menace to society.
Okay.
After a night of violent clubbing, Tommy is abducted off the street. He wakes up in a sunlit, deeply mundane rural home, and he quickly realizes there is a heavy steel chain locked securely around his neck.
He's been reduced to the status of a household pet.
Literally. His kidnappers aren't masked serial killers. They're a seemingly normal, affluent, middle-class couple. Chris, played by Stephen Graham, and Catherine, played by Andrea Riseborough. They attach a leash to Tommy's neck. When Tommy complies with an order, Chris literally pats him and calls him a good boy.
Which is deeply unsettling, because it applies the language of innocent pet ownership to the violent subjugation of a human being.
I was reading an essay by Anton Beitel at Projected Figures, and he describes the couple's method of rehabilitation as a hyper-modern update on the Ludovico technique.
Which is a crucial reference to unpack. The Ludovico technique is the fictional aversion therapy utilized in Anthony Burgess's novel A Clockwork Orange and famously adapted by Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
In that story, the violent protagonist is strapped to a chair, his eyes are forced open, and he's injected with nausea-inducing drugs while being forced to watch films of extreme graphic violence.
Yes.
The goal is to create a classical conditioning response, associating his violent urges with physical agony until he is quote-unquote cured.
But what makes the conditioning and heal so much more insidious is the media they use. Chris and Catherine don't force Tommy to watch random movies of violence. They confiscate Tommy's own smartphone. And they force him, day after day, to watch his own recorded videos of his own antisocial, depraved behavior. They force him to confront the reality of the monster he was on loop.
That is a profound psychological fracture. Watching random violence creates a generalized aversion. Forcing someone to watch their own sins creates a devastating shame spiral. It breaks down the ego completely.
And this is where Andrea Riseborough's performance apparently elevates the film into truly dangerous moral territory. Because as Tommy's ego breaks, as he suffers through withdrawal from the drugs, Catherine steps in and offers him something he has clearly never experienced: unconditional maternal love.
Interesting.
They provide him with a structured reading list of classic literature. Good conduct earns him small freedoms, like walking in the garden. Bad conduct earns him the chain. And terrifyingly, it works.
It worked.
Tommy slowly withdraws from his addictions. His aggression fades. He undergoes a profound, total reform of character, eventually becoming a docile, integrated part of their bizarre family unit.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ambiguity here is the source of the horror. The film purposefully places the viewer in a highly compromised moral position.
I'll ask you the provocative question that the movie seemingly poses. Is it ethical for the audience to find themselves rooting for the kidnappers? Because Tommy was a violent danger to society, and the traditional penal system clearly wasn't working.
That is exactly the trap the director sets. Are we watching a triumph of patient, beneficent parenting and extreme tough love? Or are we watching a horrifying case of induced Stockholm syndrome, false imprisonment, and cultic brainwashing?
Right.
By presenting a protagonist who is initially abhorrent and demonstrating that this horrific illegal deprivation of liberty actually, quote-unquote, cures him, the film forces the audience to confront their own latent authoritarianism.
It makes you complicit in the torture. It is so deeply unsettling.
Scary.
But if Heel traps its protagonist in a physical house, the final film on our slate manages to trap the audience entirely inside their own heads. I want to talk about an A24 release called Undertone. It's directed by Ian Twosson. It opens on March 13th. And Chris Evangelista over at Slash Film gave it a glowing 8 out of 10, calling it one of the most genuinely terrifying experiences of the year.
And what's remarkable about Undertone is the sheer scale of its financial constraints. It is the definition of a micro-budget production.
But wait, let me challenge this indie darling narrative for a second. We just spent 20 minutes dissecting why an $85 million budget ruined The Bride. But doesn't a true micro-budget come with its own massive flaws?
Well,
if a movie is shot entirely in the director's parents' house, which Undertone literally was, doesn't it usually just look cheap? How does a movie with zero visual spectacle actually generate an 8 out of 10 review from a major critic?
because the director understands the neurological mechanics of fear. Undertone doesn't try to show you a monster it can't afford.
Yeah.
It forces your own brain to render the monster for free.
Okay, let's break down how it does that. The plot follows a woman named Evie, played by Nina Kiri. Evie co-hosts a moderately successful paranormal podcast called The Undertone with a guy named Justin. Evie is currently living in her childhood home because she is caring for her comatose, dying mother. The house is described as being absolutely suffocated by out-of-date, intensely creepy Catholic
Iconography.
which establishes an immediate, heavy atmospheric dread. The weeping statues, the bleeding hearts, the crucifixes staring down from the shadows. It's a very specific, oppressive environment.
Evie has set up a makeshift podcasting studio right at the dining room table. The inciting incident occurs when Justin emails her a batch of 10 mysterious audio files submitted by a listener.
Okay.
The listener is a husband who claims his wife has started sleep-talking in deeply disturbing ways, and he set up a recorder in their bedroom to capture it.
And the film essentially forces Evie, and by extension the audience, to hit play.
We spend the entire runtime of this movie trapped in that dim, silent house with Evie and her comatose mother. We never see the married couple who submitted the tapes. We never leave the property.
That's incredibly isolating.
The director uses heavy negative space in his framing. He constantly positions Evie off-center in the shot, leaving these massive, dark, empty hallways looming over her shoulder. It practically begs the audience's eyes to dart around the darkness, waiting for something to emerge.
Right.
But the visual isolation is just a setup for the real weapon of the film, the sound design.
This is where the neurological manipulation happens.
Evangelista's review specifically praises the impeccable, aggressive use of noise-canceling sound design. When Evie puts her heavy studio headphones over her ears, the ambient sound of the physical house completely drops away.
The isolation deepens.
The audience's audio perspective shifts entirely inside Evie's headspace. We are cocooned with her, listening in high definition to the terrifying, distorted, guttural sleep-talking on the recordings. The film weaves in all these modern internet urban legends, cursed YouTube audio, subliminal messaging hidden in nursery rhymes, auditory hallucinations.
By funneling the priori threat exclusively through the audio track, the director is executing a brilliant bypass of the visual cortex.
Explain the science of why that is so much scarier than seeing a ghost.
When a horror movie shows you a CGI monster or a guy in a rubber suit, the visual cortex of your brain immediately goes to work processing the image. It categorizes the threat.
It figures out what it is.
It defines its shape, its size, its limitations, and very quickly, your brain recognizes the artificiality of the image and dismisses it as fake. The tension is released.
Oh, that makes sense.
But auditory processing works differently, especially when paired with visual deprivation.
Right.
When we hear a distorted, unnatural sound, but cannot see the source of it, our evolutionary survival instincts kick into overdrive.
Right.
Our imagination desperately tries to fill in the blank. We paint our own personalized nightmare in the negative space the director provided.
It is the Jaws effect, perfectly modernized for the podcast generation. Steven Spielberg couldn't get the mechanical shark to work, so he had to hide it underwater, and it made the movie a masterpiece because the unseen threat is always worse. Undertone proves that the monster you invent in your own head while listening to a creepy audio file alone in the dark will always be exponentially more terrifying than whatever Warner Bros. Can render for $85 million.
It relies entirely on the audience's own psychology to do the heavy lifting.
So if we pull all of these threads together, the landscape of early 2026 horror is incredibly revealing. We've seen that the old rules no longer apply.
They really don't.
You cannot simply throw an astronomical budget at a classic Gothic romance like The Bride and expect it to resonate. The sheer weight and polish of the production crushes the tension. And conversely, you cannot simply slap a 16mm vintage filter onto a bare-bones script like Dolly and expect the audience to mistake nostalgia for actual dread.
The blunt instruments are failing. The horror that is actually penetrating the cultural consciousness right now is hyper-specific, deeply personal, and highly constrained.
Exactly. The films that are succeeding are the ones that weaponize our own daily routines against us. They are the films that explore the agonizing erasure of our cultural identities and the physical toll of forced assimilation, like the brilliant body horror of Slanted.
Yeah.
They are the films interrogating the vicious, artificial nature of our social circles, whether that's the toxic corporate wellness cults operating in the mall basement of Forbidden Fruits, or the deadly, literalized digital obsession of dark distortion.
Right.
And they are the micro-budget triumphs that lock us in a single room and manipulate our psychology, whether through the extreme behavioral conditioning of Heel or the claustrophobic, noise-canceling auditory terrors of Undertone.
It paints a portrait of a society that feels simultaneously hyper-connected through digital lenses, yet physically and emotionally trapped in a state of profound isolation.
And for you, listening right now, the ultimate takeaway is that you don't even need to brave the theaters to understand what these films are saying about us. You are living it. The movies that stick with us are the ones that hold up a dark mirror to our daily routines, whether that's scrolling through filters or listening to a podcast alone in the dark.
Which forces us to look forward and ask a deeply unsettling question about the trajectory of the genre.
What's that?
If our cinematic fears have evolved so rapidly over the last 40 years, moving from the sprawling physical isolation of a summer camp or a Texas farmhouse, down to the intimate digital confinement of the smartphone camera we hold in our hands, what is the logical endpoint of this contraction?
That is the exact thought I want to leave you with to mull over. We've mapped the evolution of fear. We've moved from the spooky Gothic castle to the backwoods cabin to the mall, and now to the iPhone. What is the haunted house of the 2030s going to look like?
As our lives become even more enmeshed with technology, will the ultimate horror movie in 10 years just be a terrifyingly accurate, predictive, AI-generated simulation of our own digital footprints turning against us?
Will the slasher chasing you through the woods no longer be a guy in a mask, but an algorithm constructed from every deleted search history, every curated photo, and every compromised piece of data you ever uploaded?
That is a genuinely terrifying concept to mull over the next time you blindly click agree on a software terms of service update.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope we've given you some fascinating and deeply unsettling insights to explore on your own. Keep questioning the media you consume, pay attention to the negative space in the shadows, and we will